So in this part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just texture the belt very quickly. The texturing process for this belt is going to happen in 2 or 3 parts. Namely, I'm going to first of all apply the leather coloring onto here. And then after I finish that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and talk about the stitching and the few ways that that could be handled. One of which is, considering the modeling for the stitching has already been done, I will go ahead and just fill in and paint every single thread, on my own. Or of course, the other way could be for me to build a alpha that will sculpt the geometry for me, and at the same time will color in each thread for me as well, exactly on every single location. It might take a little bit more time in order to set up, but if I'm going to have a lot of seams all over the character and maybe on future characters, then it could be a worthwhile investment to actually spend that time and set up the textures. Of course, once you have the textures, the nice thing is about stitching is that it's fairly standard fare for not just this character, but I could reuse it on future characters as well. So if I make myself a very specific texture map and an alpha, I could very well reuse it on every future character from now on. And obviously I could build up my library of alphas as well for, doing that, and obviously textures that go along with those. But anyways, with that said, I'm just going to go into the tool subtool menu here. I'm going to make sure that I pick my belt object like this. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just load in a texture. So texture, import. And of course, I'm going to want to find my textures that I'm going to be using for the texturing process. Okay, so in here, I'm just going to go down into the leather textures. So, pick whatever you guys have. In my case, I'm just going to pick this thing right here. I'm not sure yet which one I'm going to pick, but I think I might as well just choose this one here. Now what I've done is I've taken the original texture that I had and I've run it through Photoshop through a filter to kind of even out the tone here. You can see that there's a little bit of a fall off and there's a little bit of a darker spot here. I kind of evened that out. That's something that would be completely outside of this tutorial. I might actually make a tutorial about it later on, but anyways, for now, this is all you guys get. Anyways, no, I really want to just get going and, just focus in on this right now. So as far as the alpha goes, right now if I have this texture selected and then I change my stroke to drag rectangle, if I go ahead and just drag it on the model and I really don't want to go Z add, what I want is I just want RGB intensity to be on. If I go ahead and work like this, you might notice that you actually see the harsh edge, and I don't really want that. Now the reason why there's a fall off right now is because I have a focal shift at 0. If I go ahead and just increase that, you should get something like this. Now this is also something that not what I want, so I'm just going to go ahead and just leave it at 0. And of course in my alpha menu, I might want to turn on radial fade. So I'm going to turn that on slightly. And let's see what we get. And that doesn't look like it's enough. And you know what? It's probably because I need to actually apply an alpha texture to begin with. So let's apply something like this, first of all. And that will work just fine. I'm just going to keep applying these textures here onto this model until I get something that I like. And at the same time, another thing I could of course do is I could very well just go into solo mode and apply the textures this way. Now another way to do these leather textures is of course to make a texture that is tileable. And of course the way you do that is, well, first of all you create a tileable texture, or you find one. And then in here, just make sure that you have a regular stroke. So let's choose the freehand, for example, and let's choose the roll button here. but I would have to turn off the alpha off, radial fade off, and let's see what happens as I draw. As you can see, it's applying. Not really sure yet if it's applying in the exact way that I want, but it looks like it is. So there's there's many ways in like that I could actually employ to do this. Now inside of this belt, I'm going to paint a streak that's going to be slightly darker. So let's choose a darker color from the belt. I'm just going to hover anywhere, just keep clicking C until I get a slightly darker color. Now if I can't find the exact color I want, I'll just press space and I'll find something darker. And of course, originally when I selected my color, it put it into the red hue, so I'm just going to go ahead and just go over towards the oranges, and that's going to give me a darker brown. And now let's just take off this texture for now. And at the same time, inside my stroke, I want to take off the roll. Now I know that I went over that part very, very quickly, but I will explain it a little bit later on about what exactly the roll does and how it works. Of course, I did make a free tutorial about that. But again, that will be included in the kit, and it's going to be in a bonus section, most likely, or when I go over the stitching part. But yeah, I think I'm just going to leave that for the last part after this is all said and done. This really will be just sort of like a bonus, because I did go over this in detail in a free chapter. So I don't really want to repeat myself too much. Because of course all this stuff really takes a lot of time to record, in case I make any mistakes. Anyways, for now, I'm just basically going over this part, with something slightly darker. Now granted, I am being kind of sloppy, but at the same time I could just go ahead and just sample any of these colors and just paint back some of the stuff in. So it's not that big of a deal. Now, of course, when I'm painting now, I'm just going to go ahead and just make sure that I'm in symmetry mode. Am I in symmetry mode? Yes, I am. Awesome. I'll just keep continuing to do this, of course, until I'm done. And of course, if it's not symmetrically aligning, that's fine. Just turn off symmetry and do this section manually. Okay, and of course, once I'm done with all this, I'm just going to go ahead and just color each one of these threads in, again, manually. This is really a slower approach to doing this, but there's also, I guess, a trade-off, because I could be building myself a map that I could be reusing right now, which would kind of handle a lot of this for me in terms of sculpting and coloring every single one of these threads here. But at the same time, like all the stitching, I mean, at the same time, to build those maps actually takes time. So if this is just a one-off and you really don't see yourself doing any more characters with clothes and stitching and all that other stuff, then really there's no point in investing that time to build those maps. It really depends on what it is that you usually do. If you're only going to have one character with stitching and then the rest of them might not even, the rest of them could have maybe some other type of clothing, or maybe you're working on a cartoon and it's just a bunch of animals and it really doesn't matter. then yeah, you just basically gotta choose what it is that you want to spend your time on. Now again, I was kind of sloppy towards this area, but I'm just going to go ahead and just pick one of these colors here. I'll just paint something back in. And you know what? At this time, I guess what I could do is I could just go back into color spray like I've done before, with a much smaller kind of radius, and just go ahead and just paint in something like that. At the very least, it'll give me some variation in terms of color. I might actually want to go into the stroke and lower the variance that I get here, just so that it kind of keeps the color, or at least a little closer to the color. And you know what, if this doesn't work out, go right back and just enable the texture, and maybe even draw with the texture itself. Of course, it's always good to turn on the drag rectangle. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is, I guess at this point in time, there's a few options you have. One, go to layers, start doing the stitching, and I guess I could just do that. I just added one layer. I'm going to now sample one of these colors, and then go into my right-click menu. You choose a slightly higher intensity, or just lighter color of a variation of whatever I had here, and just you know, zoom out, make sure you're in symmetry mode, of course. And then just start painting on the threads. Of course, your brush really should be set to do that. So I'm just going to do that now. And I really should be trying this without the texture on. Maybe even desaturate this slightly. And yeah, just go over it like this. Again, there is a faster way to do this, much faster way, if you have your texture and everything kind of filled in. And again, I will go over this in a different tutorial. For now, I'm just going to use this method here. It's not really a method, I mean, it's probably as manual as I can make it. But it'll do the job. Considering how little stitching there is on this model, I don't really mind, to be honest. And of course, it doesn't mean that I also have to be... I guess the one advantage to this right now, and I guess it's not really much of an advantage, but the fact that I can color each one individually. I can make a slight variation in intensity of how hard I press on this, you know, on the strokes, on the threads. Otherwise, every single one of them would have been exactly the same if I had to use the automatic approach by using alphas and textures that were defined for each thread. For each stitch, I guess. Oops. There really isn't much to say in this part, to be honest. Just going over the entire object. Doing this exactly. So let's zoom out and let's see how this looks. Yeah, it's not looking too bad. Of course, I'm not looking at what's happening here, so I'll probably just end up erasing that detail. And of course, down here, it also kind of broke apart, so I might as well just turn off symmetry. That's not exactly working out. But if I get out of here, I look at the entire object, overall, I think it's, what I've done here is very positive. Now, I could have also used a different kind of leather texture for this belt, and I think I might just go over it again. But for the sake of how, this worked, I mean, that's pretty much all I did. I just went into my drag rectangle, I chose a texture, I just did that. Or, of course, I could have just chosen a different regular stroke, made sure my texture was still there, made sure there was absolutely no kind of fall off of any type, then go to stroke, turn on roll, and just paint this whole thing very, very quickly. And you know what? I'm just going to select this item here, go back into my texture, and once again I'm going to go into stroke, roll, and apply it like this. Very quickly. Now, of course, when you're painting this, one thing that you should note is that often when I'm painting textures, especially with poly painting, I often have the auto masking, backface masking on. If you're painting something like a belt, I mean, you probably, especially if you're painting right across the model, you usually want to apply it to both sides, so make sure that the brush auto masking backfacing option is off. This way, at the very least, you'll have a much easier time filling in both sides. So as far as this chapter goes, that's as far as I'm going to take this chapter. Obviously, again, there's more than one way to do the stitching, and all I would have otherwise done is just gone ahead and just manually went around this object here. Again, I will be introducing a different way of doing this, but it involves a little bit of Photoshop, which is why I don't really want to focus on that just yet. I want to make most of this, if not all of it, as much focused on ZBrush as possible, and not any other application, especially for this tutorial. Now, I will be using Photoshop later when I go ahead and just use the ZApp link. That's very Photoshop reliant, I guess, or any other third-party or outside-party application. But besides that, I will only be using ZBrush. So anyway, so that's it for this chapter, and in the next chapters, I will be going ahead and working on the clothes and using a little bit of Spotlight and ZApp link and doing all that jazz. But you know what? Actually, you know what? I'm going to work on the eye next. Yeah, the eye and the belt buckle. The clothes will be done last, and then of course I might go over and do just kind of like a finishing touch on some areas, but I think I'm just going to leave that for a time lapse. Right at the end, I think I'm just going to do that, just kind of like a time lapse. Maybe I might narrate over it as well, but just kind of give like a few tips and pointers here and there. But for the most part, yeah, so next parts are going to include the eye and the belt buckle. Cheers.